The Stranger's Confession. The chapel was bathed in the soft glow of candlelight as Daniel sat in his usual pew on Friday, May 23rd, 2025, at 9:39 p.m. The familiar scent of aged wood and wax filled the air, a comforting ritual after a long week at the auto repair shop. His nightly visits had become a lifeline since he'd found the open Bible on the altar days ago. Its verse from James 1:12, "Blessed is the one who perseveres under trial," still echoing in his mind. Yet the struggle with lust that drove him to his knees each night persisted, a fire he couldn't extinguish. The note he'd left in the Bible earlier that week, a desperate, "Why does God allow this struggle?" scribbled in a moment of vulnerability, felt like a plea cast into the void. Tonight, however, the chapel wasn't empty. A stranger sat beside him, his presence quiet but heavy. The man's weathered face, framed by a graying beard, carried the weight of years, and his eyes, deep and weary, seemed to hold a story of their own. He wore a faded jacket, the kind that had seen too many winters, and his hands rested on his lap, fingers tracing the edge of a small, worn prayer book. Daniel glanced at him, unsure whether to speak, but the man broke the silence first. "I saw your note," the stranger said, his voice low and gravelly, as if it hadn't been used in a while. "In the Bible, on the table. I've fought the same fight, lust that feels like a chain." The words hit Daniel like a gust of wind, stirring both relief and unease. He hadn't expected anyone to find his note, let alone respond so directly. He shifted in his seat, the wooden pew creaking under his weight, and turned to face the man fully. "I'm Eli," the stranger continued, offering a faint, tired smile. "I've been coming to this chapel for years, longer than you might think. I recognize the pain in your words because I've lived it." Daniel's throat tightened. He had spent so long hiding his struggle, bearing it beneath forced smiles and late-night prayers, that hearing someone else speak of it so openly felt both liberating and terrifying. Eli leaned back, his gaze drifting to the flickering candle on the altar. "I was about your age when it started," he said, his voice softening. "The desires came out of nowhere, thoughts I couldn't control, images that kept me awake at night. I thought I was broken, that God had turned his back on me. I spent years in guilt, praying for it to stop, but it never did. Not completely." He paused, rubbing his hands together as if to warm them, though the chapel was far from cold. Daniel listened, his heart pounding. Eli's story mirrored his own in ways he hadn't expected. He thought of the nights he'd knelt in this very spot, whispering pleas for relief, and the shame that followed him like a shadow. "So what did you do?" Daniel asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "How did you keep going?" Eli turned to him, his eyes softening with a quiet wisdom. "One night I was here, just like you are now. I was at my lowest, ready to give up. But in prayer I felt something shift. It wasn't that the temptation disappeared, it didn't. But God showed me something. He didn't remove the struggle because it was a forge, shaping my will to choose him over my desires." Eli's words were steady, carrying the weight of hard-earned truth. "It's not about being free of the fire, Daniel. It's about learning to walk through it and still choose the light." The words settled over Daniel like a heavy blanket, both comforting and challenging. He thought of the verse from James, the idea of perseverance under trial, and Sarah's note he'd found earlier that week. Perhaps God allows the struggle to teach us reliance on him. Now Eli's story added another layer, a forge, a shaping. Could his weakness really be a tool for strength? The idea was hard to grasp, but it stirred a spark of hope in his chest, faint but undeniable. Eli reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small, tarnished cross pendant, its edges worn smooth from years of handling. "This was my father's," he said, holding it up to the candlelight. "He gave it to me before he passed, told me to hold on to faith even when it felt impossible. I carry it to remind myself that the struggle doesn't define me. My choices do." He pressed the pendant into Daniel's hand, closing his fingers around it. "You're not alone in this, son, and you're not forsaken." Daniel stared at the pendant, its cool metal a grounding weight in his palm. He felt a lump in his throat, a mix of gratitude and uncertainty. "Thank you," he managed, his voice thick with emotion. Eli nodded, rising slowly from the pew. As he walked toward the chapel door, his footsteps echoed softly in the stillness, leaving Daniel with the pendant and a new perspective. The clock above the altar ticked past 9:45 p.m., its steady rhythm a reminder of time moving forward. Daniel stayed in the pew, the pendant in one hand, his other tracing the edge of the note he'd written. Doubt still lingered, a quiet whisper in the back of his mind. But Eli's words had planted a seed. Maybe this struggle wasn't a curse to be escaped, but a path to be walked, a path that, with God's help, could lead to something greater.